Kotone Montagne was the first dual element character in P5X. She can use both wind and ice elements in battle, and after doing a lot of testing, I can now finally answer the following questions. How much better is Mont compared to Fleuret? Is a 5-star weapon worth it? Is the ice form as bad as people say? And finally, is Frostgale Mont worth pulling? If you like what you're seeing and you want to see more videos like this in the future, do like and subscribe, as I'll be doing a full review for characters that's coming in the future. So let's start off with her kit. So her A0, she has two forms, the spring, which is the wind, and winter, which is the ice. And during the battle, she can change freely between the modes as long as her skill 3 is not active, and her skill 3 can give the spring's edge and the winter's edge. Then when you change the mode, obviously your skills and highlight will also change. And then at the start of battle, she will be in the wind mode, but if there are more ice characters than wind characters, then she will enter as ice mode. And lastly, for every spring's vestige and winter's vestige stack that she gains, she will permanently increase attack by 5% up to 7 stacks. So a 35% attack buff if you stack it to full. And you get this spring's edge when you have the skill 3 active, which we'll get to in a bit. So her skill 1, the wind form, she deals wind damage to 1/4 3 times and 30% chance to inflict the wind sweep. When Spring's Edge, which is the skill 3, is active, you gain a Spring's Vestige stack, and it inflicts Spiral Sequence for 2 turns. When Mont hit an opponent with Spiral Sequence, her crit damage will increase by 29.3%. Then for the Winter mode or Ice mode, she deals 1 hit of ice damage to 1 character and has a high chance of inflicting freeze. And if the foe is already frozen, you inflict on ice for 2 turns, and you will do more ice damage to opponents that have on ice. For skill 2 wind mode, you will do an AoE wind attack 3 times, and then when the skill 3 is active, you get 2 Spring's Vestige stacks. For the wind mode, also similar, you do 1 hit to all foes, then you have a chance of freeze. Then when the skill 3 is active, you increase this skill damage by 20%. For skill 3, for the wind mode, you will activate Spring's Edge for 1 turn, and also deal 3 hits of wind damage. While this Spring's Edge is active, every time an ally does a skill, a highlight or resonance, that will do extra bit of damage based on Mont's attack, and also gain 1 Spring's Vestige stack. Then when this Spring's Edge ends, you will spend all of these stacks to increase Mont's resonance damage. So after using skill 3, then 1 turn later, she will do resonance or full up attack depending on how much vestige stack she gained during that 1 turn. For the ice mode, you activate Winter's Edge. So it's a different name, but it's still like a similar concept, the same field effect thing. And then you deal 1 hit of ice damage to 1 foe. Then while this Winter's Edge is active, every time an ally attacks, you will grant Glacial Heart to all foes for 2 turns. And then you can protect them. So basically it's like a shield. And this effect can activate 2 times. Then this second half is pretty much the same as the wind one. So when the Winter's Edge is active, every time an ally deals damage from resonance skill or highlight, you gain a Winter's Vestige stack. And then by the end of the field effect, Mont will do Ice Resonance depending on how many stacks you get during that turn. For the Spring mode highlight, you do 3 hits of damage to 1 foe, and then you gain 1 more Spring's Vestige stack. And this one can stack up to over the limit. So the limit is actually 5, so you can get up to 6 with the highlight. Of course, it gives 1 extra. But then if the Spring's Edge is not active, you deal 1 more hit of damage. Then for Winter mode, the highlight will do 1 hit of damage. Then you have a chance of inflicting Icebound. And this Icebound is basically like a stun, which is kind of useless for like SOS and guild bosses, because those bosses are usually immune to like ailments, right? Like the status ailments. Then when the Winter's Edge is active, you increase the chance of inflicting the Icebound, but again, it's not that useful. And if the Winter's Edge is not active, you increase the highlight damage by 20%. All of this sounds a little bit confusing, but it's very simple. You basically just use the skill 3, activate the field effect, and then if possible, you use some wind or ice damage to get the stack. Then by the end of the field effect, Mont will do damage to the boss, depending on how many stacks you gain for that turn. So for the first passive, in the start of battle, if you are a wind ally, you increase 33% wind damage for Mont. Then you have an ice ally, you increase Mont's ice damage by 33%. So it depends on which form you use. And this also includes Wander's Persona, so you don't exactly need a wind character to pair with Mont. So you can just equip like a Narcissus or Vishnu with the first persona, and Mont will still get the buff. For second passive, when you're in the Spring mode, each time an ally attacks with wind skill, you increase party's attack by 8.1% for 2 turns. Stacks out to 5 times. For wind mode, each time Mont gains a shield, increase party's defense by 9% for 2 turns. Stacks out to 4 times. So the wind form is definitely the more offensive one, and the ice form is the more defensive one. For her 5-star weapon, she increases her own attack by 30%. Then each time Mont gains a Springs or Winter's Veggie stack, increase the crit rate for 2 turns. Stacks up to 3 times. So you can get up to like 16% or something, which is a pretty good amount. And then when you activate the skill 3, you increase wind or ice damage by 27% for 2 turns. So just a bunch of damage buffs. For her A1, each time you activate the skill 3, you gain another stack of the Veggie stack. Then when the Spring's Edge or skill 3 ends, you increase resonance damage by 8% for each Spring's Veggie stack, up to 40%. So you need to get 5 stacks ideally for her A1. It's the same thing for the ice form. For her A2, when her skill 3 is active, you decrease all foes' defense by 40%, and then you decrease party's SP cost by 25%. For ice mode, you increase party's ice damage by 30%, and then decrease also SP cost by 25%. For A4, in the wind mode, when you activate the highlight and if the Spring's Edge is active, or the skill 3 is active, you gain 1 more stack, and this stack can exceed the maximum limit. And if the skill 3 is not active, you increase higher damage by 35%. It's also the same one for the ice mode. For A6, for the wind mode, after you activate the resonance, when the skill 3 ends, you extend the duration by 1 turn. So the skill 3 lasts for 2 turns. And then you regain up to 2 spent Spring's Veggie stacks. So you just regain 2 more stacks. And you regain up to 2 stacks that exceed the maximum limit. So you can get up to 4 stacks. Then the resonance can be activated again and increase the resonance PS rate by 4% for each Veggie stack, up to 20%. So the A6 is a pretty strong one. A lot of damage and emphasis on the resonance. And then for the ice mode, it's pretty much the same thing but for ice. For a card set, Freedom and Triumph is pretty good. If you're running her with ice form, then you should go with Meditation and Opulence. So it's the same set for Fox, because it increases the ice damage and the resonance damage. And the full set gives you more crit damage for resonance. But typically, Freedom and Triumph would be the better one. It gives you crit rate, it gives you pierce rate on resonance, gives you more resonance damage. And for the stats, it's pretty much like a typical DPS stuff. So for substats, you just focus on pierce rate, crit damage, attack, all those stuff. For the Moon main stat, damage multiplier or attack is nice. And it also depends on your substats. For the star, it can be crit multiplier or crit rate, depending how much crit rate that you have. If you already overcap on crit rate, go for crit multiplier. And of course for the sky card, attack percent. For rotation, it's going to be 3-1, 3-1, 3-1. Then for A6, it's going to be 3-1-1, 3-1-1. And the reason for that is because the skill 3 lasts for 2 turns now, instead of 1 turn. One thing to note for Mont is that you need at least 1% SP recovery. Just 1%, because her skills use a lot of SP. And if you want to complete a 3-1-3-1-3-1 rotation, you do need 1% SP. As for her team, you typically just run her with supports. So Court, Twins, for sustain, you can do Marion, you can do Cherish. A lot of options for her, as long as you have like a solid support to support her damage. For navigators, it can be Futaba, Win, or Kian. Futaba is the best one obviously. For a dagger, it really depends what you need. If you already have enough defense debuff, if you have a lot of pierce already, Ex Machina is not a bad option. If you need more defense debuff, you can run either Starry Compass or Arc Knife. Use Starry Compass if you don't really plan to inflict any ailments. If you plan to inflict a couple elements, then you can try Arc Knife. Just keep in mind that Arc Knife only lasts for 2 turns, so you need to attack like 3 times in the fight. If you are not attacking 3 times in the fight, you can just use Starry Compass. At R5, you debuff defense by 22%. And every hit that Mont gives can give the stack. So if she hits 3 times with your skill 1, you get 3 stacks. So it's very easy to keep the 100% uptime for this one. For Persona, it also depends a lot. Vishnu typically a very good persona for her, because you're being Wind and also the defense debuff. You have to put a Wind persona here in front, unless you're running like Morgana or something, which I don't recommend, because the persona counts towards the Mont's passive for the 33% wind damage increase. Then other persona, you can run Janosik if you need more defense debuff with the Mark. The Ionizers is also a good one for crit damage buff, crit rate buff. For Minion, your typical other strong buffer as well, but not as good as you would think, because Dominant excels at buffing skill damage, and a good chunk of damage from Mont comes from the resonance, which Dominant doesn't buff, especially from the passive here. 6.4% attack and 15% damage buff. Then you can just run your typical other strong buffers like your Kotone or your Kotone. Is a 5-star weapon worth it? So here's a table showing you the difference between A0R0 Mont and A0 Mont. And looking at the bottom row here, it's a clear 20% increase if you have a 5-star weapon. That's a pretty big buff. And it's not that surprising because a 5-star weapon is a really solid buff. Just a refresher, the 5-star weapon gives you crit rate 5.4% times 3, plus 16.2% crit rate. Any weapon that buffs crit rate is a pretty good weapon. And on top of crit rate, also there's a 27% wind damage increase for 2 turns when you use the skill 3. Pretty much these two passives will have 100% uptime as long as you do your typical 3-1-3-1 rotation. The only caveat to this crit rate is that you might overcap on your crit rate if you are not careful. Basically, any crit rate that goes above 100% is wasted crit rate. So yeah, if you have something like A1 Court, A1 Futaba, if you use a bunch of Revolution and Rebellion, you have crit rate main stat as your card, you can easily overcap the crit for Mont. Recommend you to definitely do some calculations on the crit rate. Make sure that you do not overcap. Because if you overcap, this first sentence, this first buff from Mont becomes pretty much useless. Because like I said, any crit rate above 100% is wasted crit rate. So whether or not the 5-star weapon is worth or not, that's I guess for you to decide. And personally, I think it is worth it. 20% is quite a big buff. The next section is gonna be Frostgale Mont against Fleuret. I'm pretty sure most of you are very curious about this, right? Because I'm sure many of you or all of you has Fleuret, but you are unsure how much better Mont is compared to Fleuret. And this table shows you just that. And let me just say, I'm quite surprised by the big jump in numbers. Before I tested this, I was predicting like at most 50% more points from Mont. But no, it's straight up double the points for all of this. More than 2 times better compared to Fleuret. That's a very big difference. You can also see that for the SOS, I was using only A6 Fleuret because I cannot borrow in SOS. For the guild bosses, I've borrowed my A6R0 guildmates Fleuret, and all of them are just 2 times higher for Mont. Very big difference. If you are chasing for score, sure, Mont is not a bad pick because it gives you a lot more points. The next section is an interesting one. It's going to be Mont against Queen. Which one is actually better? So you might be wondering like how am I supposed to, how do I even test this? Thankfully, we had a neutral boss for the first week of the update, which was Atavaka, which is the UE boss, and it is both neutral to Queen and Nuclear. So I can put Queen and Mont to the test. Unfortunately, I couldn't put Mesa because the boss resists physical, so it would be unfair to Mesa. So here's the result. You can see that Mont is better than Queen by 23.9%, which is quite a difference, I would say. But I have to emphasize that this is only one test, because this is the only boss that's neutral throughout the 2 weeks update. So we actually do need a bit more data in order to have a more conclusive saying. But I wouldn't be surprised if Mont is better than Queen for the other bosses as well. And if you're wondering, I'm actually using the same team for these two. I did not use Vino for Queen. The reason is because it is DOD, so I can actually just break with a Queen skill 1 and get all the elements for the last 2 turns. So this should be a fair fight for Queen. And the problem with Queen is that you need Vino if you're doing the regular 6-turn rotation. For Mont, you don't need that. You can just run with Cord and a healer. For Queen, you need Vino and a healer. So for like a general team or boss fight, Mont, I would say is better overall, mainly because of easier team building and not needing one specific character to be put together with Mont. But again, this is only one test on one boss, so take what I say with a grain of salt, because it is not enough evidence. Now let's talk about using Mont as an Ice DPS. So many people say that Mont's Ice DPS is pretty bad, but is that actually true? Here's the result. Also on Atavaka, because it's a neutral boss, it's neutral to Ice, so I can actually test stuff on this boss. So you can see that I tested using A0R0 Frostgale Mont Ice form and the regular 4-star Mont at A6. And also I put A0R0 Wind Frostgale Mont as like a baseline to compare. So A6 4-star Mont is 32% worse than Frostgale Mont Ice form. Not surprising. A 5-star should outperform 4-star, but it's not by a lot honestly, compared to like Fleuret, right? Fleuret was double, this one is not even double, this one is like 50% higher from, if you look at the damage increase from 4-star Mont to 5-star Mont. Okay, maybe the 32% is not the best indicative for the number, but anyways, if you look at the Wind form, it's 82.2% higher than Frostgale Mont Ice form. In other words, the Ice form for Frostgale Mont is indeed pretty bad. Reason is simple. Ice form doesn't really buff much damage to Mont herself. It's mostly like a defensive utility thing. She buffs defense for your team. It's mostly to use her for a Fox team, which sadly I didn't test because I don't really know how to test this. Maybe I could have tested it for the Haru boss, but I don't really have the time to test it anymore. But theoretically, Frostgale Mont with Fox is going to be pretty solid, I think, if the third guild boss runs back. I would be curious to see how she would work with Fox, because theoretically they do synergize quite well with the shields and the defense buff that Mont gives, and she can do damage herself as well. But yeah, if you want to pull Mont just for Ice DPS, nah, I wouldn't recommend. And at that point, might as well just use your Queen or something, because the Queen scored higher than the Ice Mont. Now on to the section where I talk about my experience using Mont, both the positives and the negatives. I'll start with the negative first, and this negative is actually not even about Mont herself, but about the Freedom and Triumph card set. This card is annoying because it only gives a pierce rate buff to the Resonance only. It's a 16% pierce rate buff. It's a good number, but the problem with that is that Resonance is only half the damage it does. It's only half her kit, which means that you get pierce rate for only half of her damage. If it's a crit damage buff, an attack buff, or a general damage buff, then this is a good buff. But if it's a crit rate or a pierce rate buff, it's annoying because it becomes hard to do like a defense or crit calculation, because by the end of the day you pretty much ignore this pierce rate or crit rate buff because you want to also buff the other damage, the other half of her kit, so her skill 1 and skill 3 and her highlight. What I'm saying is this full card set is kinda useless. It's a similar reason why Messa's 5-star weapon is also kinda bad, because his 5-star weapon only buffs pierce rate for the rending damage, which is only half of his kit. The second thing that I don't like about Mont, which isn't really a problem about Mont herself, but problem with Wonders Persona's options. There's not a lot of Ice Persona that can debuff. Actually, I don't think there's any Ice Persona that can do damage, that can do an Ice damage to debuff the opponent. Which means that if you use her as Ice DPS, it becomes difficult to get the Vestige stacks, which is I think also the reason why Ice form kinda sucks. It's not because only about her, but her options are also limited. The last bad thing I want to talk about is about how her Resonance works, because the Resonance rotates every other turn, right? So turn 2, 4 and 6, which means that it becomes a bit difficult to sync with a Futaba or Core skill 3, because those are usually your burst turns and you do Resonance on like turn 4, you skip turn 3, so it becomes a little bit awkward. Not that big of a deal because it's still damaged by the end of the day, but sometimes the buffs will wear off after the third turn. Now time for the positives. So this one I already kind of talked about a little bit, and it's that Wonders Wind and Ice Persona triggers Mont's passive, which is the one that gives you 33% Wind or Ice damage. So you actually don't need a Wind or Ice character on the team. So Wonders Persona fulfills the requirement, which makes team building easier, thankfully. The next thing I want to talk about is actually a passive in general, because a passive is a team-wide buff, which means that your other party will also get attack buff, but they will do a bit more damage. Unfortunately, running Mont and Fleuret together isn't the most ideal one, because Fleuret just isn't good enough compared to using like a strong buffer like the Twins or Court. And lastly, I want to talk about a skill 1, and it's actually about the Windswept. It's kind of random to talk about Windswept, but the reason why I'm talking about this is because this skill 1 actually synergizes well with Vishnu. So if you look at Vishnu's signature skill, if the target already has Windswept, you will increase the foe's wind damage taken by 27% for 2 turns. The problem with this signature skill is that you need to already have Windswept to use the signature skill, and you need Wonder himself usually to inflict the Windswept for Vishnu. So let's say the turn 1 you use a Spike Narcissus, then turn 2 you use a Vishnu signature skill. But with Mont skill 1, you can actually inflict the Windswept herself, which means that on the next turn, you can use a Vishnu signature skill to debuff more damage, to increase the wind damage taken. It's something minor, but a 27% buff is a decent buff. The final section of the video, should you pull Frostgale Mont? I will only have one rating for this character, and the reason is that it's kind of easy to assess her, because on one hand, you have a wind assassin in Fleuret. On the other hand, you have a blast assassin in Kasumi Yoshizawa, who is coming in like 2 to 3 weeks. With these two characters already like existing, one character you already own, the other character coming in 3 weeks, it puts Mont in an awkward position. So you may argue that, you know, like I already showed, Fleuret is like 2 times worse than Mont. That is true. He is 2 times worse, yes, but there is at least a replacement for Wind Assassin. On the other hand, you have Kasumi, who is a Blessed Assassin, and we do not have any Blessed Assassin in the game or in the near future, so the value for Kasumi is a lot higher. And I'm not saying that Frostgale Mont is a bad character. She is by no means a bad character. She is pretty good, but considering the two things that I just said, Fleuret and Kasumi, you don't really need Frostgale Mont, if I'm being 100% honest. And if you're already a queen, you pretty much cover single target DPS for the next 3 weeks until Kasumi comes. So for the final pull rating for Frostgale Mont, I give it a 6 out of 10. Not really recommended.